Based on a true story is a common but cheesy tagline used in horror films, as most of the time people don't take it too seriously, and oftentimes they're exaggerations of tales of true stories, with varying liberties and changes that suit the stories. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is loosely based on the crimes of Ed Gein, who was a real-life cannibal whose house was covered with real human remains. But of course, the story only shares the fact that both Leatherface and Ed Gein participated in cannibalism and grave robbing. But that is it. Aside from movies that followed the horrific events to a T, not many have interesting real-life comparisons until I saw Outlast. To be fair, Outlast is a schizo-fest full of some wild moments, but there's a real-life counterpart where a dark company similar to Murkoff Company is seen in the story. This mysterious company, who has had too many humans' right violations to count, at least for this incident, was the CIA themselves. This secret operation was started by the CIA, which would forever be a stain on their history as an organization. Some are true and some stories hinge on conspiracy theories that, to be frank, come from the understandable fear of a powerful yet secretive organization. There still is quite a bit of eradicated information that was not released by the CIA, as well as there being evidence that was destroyed by them. So, there are a lot of holes in the story, but the main thing is to take away is that there isn't a clear picture just due to the amount of secrets that are yet to be discovered. But the CIA had a project called the MKUltra, which has to be one, if not, the darkest experience that were made in human history. The project as a whole was a glorified torture experiment that destroyed the human mind. Essentially, the CIA wanted to see if they can mind control through any means such as drugging, electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and removing stimulus from one's body, making the brain hallucinate to compensate, and well, torture. They essentially tried to destroy the human mind for the sake of advancement. This is a blemish in the history of the CIA that would forever haunt them, as this project violated every human rights possible. Not that it was a hard task to do for the US. The documents from the project were to be destroyed under the orders of CIA Director Richard Helms. This made it difficult, almost impossible to piece things together. But a miracle happened when the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission had documents about their involvement in the project. These documents had survived Helms' orders, and then in 1977, a Freedom of Information Act released a cache that contained 20,000 documents about the project, and this information was revealed to the public, which led to a hearing in the Senate. Then in 2001, more information about the project was revealed to the public, which would forever tarnish the CIA. This story needs a bit of context as it took place during the Cold War. There's no real combat that took place during this time, but with the rising tension between the US and Russia, espionage was the focus. The US was in constant fear of Soviet Russia, China, and North Korea. The spread of communism was a concern, and during this time espionage was a concern, and the CIA wanted a way to extract information through mind control. This all came to a head after World War II, when America was concerned with the Soviet Union, and CIA Director Ellen Dulles feared Soviet brain perversion techniques and other forms of mind control. Fear became widespread when there was an increase in PTSD in Korean prisoners of war. The amount of mental damage found in these prisoners was so severe that the CIA thought it was actual mind control. So, then they had to come up with a plan to counter the Soviets' attempt at brainwashing. So then Project MKUltra was given a green light in 1953 in order to create a method to extract information from spies or political leaders during the Red Scare, as well as trying to mind control. They need a way to force someone to talk against their will, whether it is through behavior, changing drugs, or psychological manipulation. MKUltra ideally wanted to remove a person's anatomy, and with this way, they would be able to do things such as assassinations that were against one's moral standings. The perfect soldier who had no personal ties or emotions to hold them down from committing unspeakable acts. Meanwhile, they would not be able to remember what had happened to them, or ideally, feeling apathy. They also wanted to see how much the human mind could take mentally before they break, and what methods could be used to extract information from an unwilling person, ideally a prisoner of war, or a political leader. If possible, what could be done with it? That was the main idea behind why the CIA was heavily invested in this project, to explore the extent of the human psyche, and it was possible to destroy and rebuild one's mind to become a puppet of sorts. The insane amount of people who were admitted to these facilities was rather astounding, and what made this all the more chilling is that some of them didn't belong in an asylum or these testing facilities. They were just your average citizens, prisoners, and anyone the CIA deemed useful.
My father was a victim of Dr. Cameron. He was a 27-year-old, healthy skier, canoeer, very athletic, and he had asthma. They told him if he went to the Allen Memorial, they could cure his asthma. My father.
Even people who were sick with minor ailments were used as test subjects and were privy to some of the most inhumane torture that is the stuff of nightmares. To put it simply, this was a disgusting disregard of human life that was for the most part kept secret from the general public. The CIA did some insane shit, such as outrageous amounts of LSD they purchased for testing purposes. The program would have 150 humans who would be treated like guinea pigs. The exact number of people who were involved in tests is unknown, but roughly 150 were documented. The CIA preyed on the least protected and most vulnerable members of society, such as criminals, the mentally impaired, and soldiers who had varying degrees of mental damage, especially prisoners of war. They used psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapy. The tests were to take place at universities, hospitals, or prisons around the US and Canada for whatever reason. This project lasted all the way up to 1973, when it was officially halted. It did slow down over years, but before it ended, it was still running. Sidney Gottlieb was the man responsible for this project. Various substances were used during this time, like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline, as well as other drugs like cocaine and heroin. Experiments were initially used against prisoners of war, as well as spies, but then it became diversified when they would get people like mental patients, drug addicts, and just about anyone who was willing to volunteer in these projects. Some of these tests involved giving them drugs without consent, which was in clear violation of the Nuremberg Code of Ethics that basically prohibited unethical experiments. The Nuremberg Code was used to convict war criminals from Germany during the Second World War. Yeah, I'm not going into detail. If you know, you know. The main guideline was to inform the subjects about the experiments that were to take place, as well as conducting the experiment with the thought of improvement for the subject. It isn't made to harm or destroy the test subject in any way. Yeah, that quickly went out the window. But it was done to prevent communism, so war crimes are acceptable in the eyes of the US. America at its finest, am I right? Various sub-projects were made under the umbrella of MKUltra. Operation Midnight Climax was a sub-project of MKUltra that would go to brothels and basically give LSD to unsuspecting victims that would go to the brothels, which would then again be considered a huge violation of human rights. The director of the project, Sidney Gottlieb, gave the CIA permission to give drugs to unsuspecting victims that went to bars. There are stories that the CIA would use prostitutes to lure unsuspecting victims into these experiments. Then, after a CIA agent would watch over the victim through a one-sided window. Meanwhile, Said was probably tripping balls. Then, President Truman would put a stop to this just due to the fact that this would cause mass hysteria, as well as it was just wrong on all accounts. But that didn't stop the CIA, as they would still continue with experiments on other unsuspecting victims. So, why is the CIA important to Outlast? Well, it is simple really. Outlast takes after a real-life location called Allen Memorial Institution, which was the inspiration behind the Mount Massive Asylum, the game's setting. The Allen Memorial was an institution that was located in Montreal, Canada, and was active during the beginning of 1957 and 1964. There's a possibility that they were active even before that, but it can't be confirmed. Both Canada and the US used the Allen Institution to research MKUltra. People were lied to. A lot of them were told that they were going to participate in a study to find a potential cure to schizophrenia. But that was a lie that a lot of them were told. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron was a doctor that was in charge of research for treating schizophrenia through depattering. Depattering was the act of erasing memories and trying to make the patient go into a childlike state. Essentially, he was trying to destroy a person's memory, and the doctor would try to change the patient's mental state. The subjects would listen to recording messages that were used to change someone's mental state. The purpose of this was to try and rebuild a person's brain through these methods. Patients under Dr. Cameron would say that the doctor was a cold man who wanted a breakthrough in the field, and he would often disregard the life of the patients. People were kept awake for hours, and even days on end, through electroshock therapy. People would be often broken mentally, and during this time, some patients would end up in a vegetative state. They had achieved it. They were able to break a patient's mental state. Other patients were put through sensory deprivation environments, which would be too much for patients. They would lose basic senses, such as eyesight, smell, and hearing. They would start to lose their sanity, and would often hallucinate. Other cruel punishments included starving and depriving patients of water. Oftentimes, they were desperate and the doctors would sedate them. Patients would be left as a husk. They were a shell of their former self, and those who were broken didn't fare too well, as they would suffer from retrograde amnesia and they weren't able to function like they used to be. What made this worse was the fact that these patients were not able to properly function in society. Family members would often forget their loved ones, or even would forget the existence of ever being a part of a family. Others would lose not just their jobs, but also themselves. Even to this day, some of these patients were never able to recover. Patients undergoing these experiences experience the worst forms of mental torture that not even prisoners of war were not subject to. People would not hear too much about this, or even care about these patients. Who would care about some insane lunatic? That was the thing that made it difficult for patients to get any source of justice. The medical practices were, to be frank, very unethical and highly illegal. Many patients had family members worried about their mental state, since the families were also in the dark about the procedures that took place. Many were lied to in order to keep them unaware about the horror. How was this all discovered? This is the question most of you have, knowing how hard the CIA and the Canadian government tried to keep this under wraps. They went as far as using these experiments to silence their patients, as well as trying to make it difficult for families to do anything against them. It was pretty much impossible to convict anyone of anything. The Alien Memorial Institution kept everything behind closed doors, and the Canadian government was aware, but didn't do much. This project was kept secret from the public, but it was just a matter of time before something big would leak out to the public. This is where things would turn bleak for the CIA when the highest profile death of Frank Olson was revealed to the public in the year 1953. His death was a mystery as he jumped out of his hotel room when he was in New York City. The government would rule this as a suicide due to his mounting pressures that came from his job. Frank worked as a scientist for the US. He was a bacteriologist and biological warfare scientist, to be exact. Things were normal before his death, but his details regarding his death had a lot of missing holes, like how he met up with Sidney Gottlieb, the head of the MKUltra project, and he would randomly take his life 9 days later. He was dosed with LSD by Sidney, and this was done during a private retreat between men who were closely affiliated with the MKUltra project. A retreat where both Sidney and Frank would be in attendance. Frank, alongside other participants, would be drugged unknowingly in a test run to see if a potential truth serum was possible, which consisted of what we know now as LSD, but at the time no one was aware what was truly going on during the retreat. After this, Frank was acting completely different, and he would not eat, and he became distant to even his family. His co-workers noticed that after the retreat, Frank was constantly having mood swings and was generally emotionally unstable. Understandably, he was not able to perform his normal job, and with the growing concern, Frank would meet up with John Stubbs, his co-worker, and his wife, and he would tell them, "They're afraid I might hurt you." He also said to his wife, "You've made a mistake." With the growing concern, Frank was admitted to undergo psychiatric treatment, and Frank would fly out to New York City with other close associates. He would wake up around 2 a.m. on the night of November 28th of the year 1953. During this time, the night manager would find his body in a critical state after jumping. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but their efforts were in vain, as Frank would succumb to his wounds before he received any medical attention. This was puzzling for many, as his death was ruled to be a suicide, but two police officers were skeptical of this case, as a few years prior, in 1948, Lawrence Duggan was another high-ranking government official who died the same way as Frank Coulson. His death was swept under the rug and was nothing more than a tragic death. His family was informed that he took his own life and the details were not revealed. After the declassification of various MKUltra, the Rockefeller Commission would report the illegal activities that the CIA was conducting. There was a document that alluded to the death of an unnamed army scientist who died because he was given LSD without consent. So this was a dead giveaway about the death of Frank. But due to the fact that there was a lot of evidence which was destroyed, it is unclear as to how many were tortured, as well as the various methods that were used. What makes this a scary case was not just the cruelty that took place, but it was the fact that some details are still lost to time due to the destruction of the evidence. This case is full of mystery and conspiracy theories. The government isn't unfamiliar with conducting unethical and illegal experiments that would forever tarnish the name of the CIA. Let me know what you think. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.
Falling, coming down too hard, I think I'm falling. Baddest bitches stole my heart, it's back 'cause I went all